We can start the meeting now, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So good evening, everyone, and welcome to the meeting of the Governance Committee. Just to go through the opening statement, I'd like to remind everyone that this meeting is being live streamed on our website and being recorded. Remote meetings are still somewhat new to us. Their unfamiliarity and the need to get used to their technical operation means that they are unlikely to go as smoothly as meetings held in person. So I hope that everyone taking part or observing will bear with us. To help us, councillors have been given guidance on the conduct of remote meetings, so I'd just like to emphasise a few of its points. Hopefully members of the committee are taking part from a place where they will not be disturbed or distracted. When they're not actively participating in the meeting, I would ask members and officers to keep their audio and video turned off. Anyone wishing to speak should type an H in the chat box and I will call them when it's their turn to speak. All questions and contributions must come through the chair, and please remember to turn on your video and audio when I call you to speak. Any councillor with an interest in an item should declare it and keep their audio and video switched off when it is being considered. They will not be included in any vote on the subject. When it comes to a decision on any of the recommendations or motions before us, I will assume that if no one says that they oppose them, everyone will be in agreement. If anyone says that they are opposed, I'll ask for a formal vote to be conducted. If we lose the live stream on the website, I will adjourn the meeting for 10 minutes and hopefully the problem can be fixed. If it cannot, I will adjourn the meeting until a future date. So to start on the agenda, so item number 1 is apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chair. I've had apologies from Councillor Jones and from Parish Councillor Jackson. The councillors we have attending are yourself, obviously, as Chair, Councillor Ayres. We also have Councillors Ambor, Bentley, Dudley, Walsh and Wright. We have Parish Councillors Chiswell and Saltmarsh here, and the independent person, Mrs Mills, is also attending. I'm here from Democratic Services and Lorraine Brown is here, who's the monitoring officer. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much. So moving on to item number 2, which is the minutes from the last meeting, which was held on the 17th of June. Does anyone have any questions at all on the minutes, or are we happy to approve those? Okay. I think we'll approve the minutes then and move on to item 3, which is declaration of interests. So at this point, if anyone has any interest to disclose, please could they do so now. If the interest is a disclosable pecuniary interest, they're obliged to notify the monitoring officer within 28 days of the meeting. Okay, so moving on to item number 4, which is public question time. Dan, have we received any questions?
No, we haven't, Chair. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you very much. So moving on to item number 5, which is Chair's announcements. I don't have any announcements this evening, so we can head straight on into the business, which is number 6, the monitoring officer's report. So I'll hand over to Lorraine for this one.
Good evening, councillors. Lorraine Brown here, City Council's monitoring officer. In relation to the monitoring officer's report, there is a complaints update. Members will have the update, which is within an appendix. There have been 5 new complaints since the last meeting from 3 different complainant councillors at 1 parish council against 4 different councillors. As always, I consulted with an independent person in dealing with these complaints. By way of an update in relation to the complaint reference 7 of 20, the decision notice was issued yesterday. This involved a range of matters where we decided that no further action was appropriate for a variety of reasons, including the age of the complaints, that some of the matters didn't disclose a breach of the code. There were issues around it being tit for tat, as well as other more specific issues around individual items. This was all set out in a very detailed decision notice, which has been sent to the parties. And obviously that is a normal procedure for us in relation to all complaints. In relation to the Model Code of Conduct, I have no update as to the timing of the model code being published. We were told it was expected in the autumn, but I haven't received it yet. If there's any questions, obviously I'm happy to take them.
That was really helpful. I don't know whether anyone has any questions at this point, if they could put an H in the chat box. In which case, the recommendations on this one are to note the information as to complaints made and agree this should be published on the council's website as set out in the appendix. And the second recommendation is to note the remainder of the report. So since it's just to note, we don't think we need a seconder, so I think we can move on to the next item on the agenda, which is item number 7. And this is the Senior Responsible Officer's report in relation to the council's RIPA arrangements. And again, it's Lorraine updating on that one, please.
Yes, it's me again. I'm also the Senior Responsible Officer for RIPA. RIPA relates to the Council's covert surveillance powers, which is primarily a technical area for investigators and advisors within the Council to consider. It's good practice for the Council to report RIPA activity to members, and this is why there is an annual report to the Governance Committee. The legislation changed some years ago to raise the threshold for offences to which RIPA applied. As a result, Chelmsford, like many other councils nationally, has not applied for a RIPA authorisation for some time, and again this year it is a nil return. However, the council needs to be aware of RIPA and the other relevant legal requirements, particularly around privacy laws, data protection and human rights, and to ensure that this broader range of issues are complied with when the council undertakes investigations. A remote RIPA inspection was completed during lockdown by IPCO, which is the governing body or regulator for this activity. This has meant that the council's proposed review of policies have already been considered by our regulator, whose inspector very helpfully gave some advice during the inspection in relation to the changes that needed to be made to our policies. Personnel changes, communications data and updated IPCO guidance are now within the updated RIPA policy. In relation to the social media RIPA policy, a key change relates to privacy settings, and in particular, investigators not assuming that a party's privacy is not being breached because they have not put in place privacy settings and perhaps because their profile is public. The Officer RIPA Working Group, which has recently been set up, have also considered changes to both policies. As I said, these are technical documents that I'm asking committee to recommend to council for adoption, although I'm happy to answer any questions. It might be better to wait until I've finished the update on some other aspects as well. Training is always an area that's covered in an inspection, and it wasn't really surprising that some refresher training was identified for new and existing personnel. For example, staff who are existing investigators, advisors or people who authorise and make decisions. This is more limited due to COVID-19, but where possible, this is being attended remotely. RIPA Working Group will review this when the group next meets in the new year. By way of background, in relation to the urgent RIPA audit of social media activity, which is referred to in the report, this also links with training and is about ensuring that the wider council areas that don't usually undertake investigations are not unwittingly undertaking surveillance via social media without realising the repercussions. The audit has been completed and no concerns or further training needs were identified. IPCO has recommended that the council reviews the RIPA policies annually, and this will be done in future via the RIPA Working Group reporting through to the Governance Committee. I'm happy to take any questions there are on this item.
So I've got H in the box from Councillor Bentley.
Thank you, Chair. It's a few comments on the document itself. Some of it seems a little bit unclear to me. It may be because I'm not that familiar with what it's about. So if you could give me some clarification, that'd be great. First of all, on 2.2 of the document, which is scope of the RIPA investigation process. the actual sentence doesn't seem to make sense, because it says, if the authorising officer or any applicant is in any doubt, he should ask the authorising officer, or before any directed surveillance and or CHIS is authorised, renewed, cancelled or rejected. So I can't understand why the authorising officer would need to ask the authorising officer, if you see what I mean.
If there are other queries that you've got, do you want to do them all, and then I'll?
Yeah.
I'm not sure how many there are.
There's only 3 more. Is that
Okay.
all right?
Yeah, that's fine, no problem.
I don't want to take too much time. That's the thing. On where are we? On 4.16 to 4.22 in the document, it's not entirely clear whether Chelmsford City Council will use the where is it? I'll get to the page. This conduct of covert human intelligence sources or not. It says in 4.16 the City Council has decided as a matter of policy not to undertake this type of surveillance, and then it sort of says, but maybe in exceptional circumstances they will. Is it the case that the council has decided not to undertake it, or to only undertake it in exceptional circumstances? And this is where I'm pretty sure I haven't understood exactly what's going on here. In paragraph 4.26, where it talks about it being sentences of a year, I think it is, a year or more in prison, and elsewhere it mentions about it being 6 months. So in 3.8 it's mentioned as being 6 months. I mean, it may be I'm just not understanding, maybe something completely different, but they do seem to contradict each other. And then finally, in 427, it says about the Investigatory Powers Act has removed the necessity for local authorities to seek the endorsement of a justice of peace when seeking to acquire communications data. And then elsewhere it says that a magistrate does need to be authorising this stuff. So those are the 4 things that could do with some clarity on. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Councillor Bentley. I mean, basically, what I'll do is I'll take them through in order and tell you sort of what my views are. I think 2.2 does need to be reworked. I'll update the wording of that so it reads in better English. I mean, clearly the authorising officer wouldn't speak to the authorising officer if they had a query. It's the same person. So I get the point you're making there. In relation to the next point you raised, which I think was at 3.8, hang on, let me make sure.
4.16.
Sorry, 4.16. 4.16 was about CHIS, or covert human intelligence sources. Councils very rarely use this. So there are different types of surveillance. And in effect, there are 3 different types. There's directed surveillance, there's CHIS, or covert human intelligence sources, and there's communications data. So there's like 3 different regimes. So in relation to CHIS, that's even more rare than directed surveillance. So when we talk about there being no cases where we've had authorisations, really we're talking about directed surveillance. So that's the most common one, that if a local authority was going to have an authorisation under RIPA, it's most likely to be a directed surveillance one. So CHIS is really, really rare for us. I don't even know when the council was doing quite a lot of directed surveillance activity pre-legal changes. I doubt they even did a CHIS. I mean, certainly I've been in local government for many years and I've seen a potential CHIS happen a few times in local authorities, but not many. So it is very rare. So what this is saying is that it would be something really exceptional for us to use this, if that helps. So we don't really use it. That's what we're saying. It is quite rare. But if there was exceptional circumstances, we may do so. So that's what's meant by that paragraph. The next one you referred to was 4.26. And 4.26 and 4.27 are almost similar, because this whole paragraph is talking about communications data. So this was the third regime that I referred to. And the rules for this are slightly different. So where you mentioned 3.8, which talked about the threshold for a directed surveillance authorisation being 6 months, the penalty was 6 months, that's a different regime. So the 12 months, this is purely for communications data. So for directed surveillance, the threshold in which you would need to apply for RIPA is where there's a sentence of 6 months or more. It's a criminal offence with a sentence of 6 months imprisonment or more. And also you do need to go to the magistrate's court. But for communications data, the threshold is higher and you don't need to go through court. There's a procedure where you go through NAFIN, which is the National Anti-Fraud People. So it's a different regime with a totally different way of authorising and with a different threshold. So that's why it's saying different things, if that makes any sense. It is because it's a technical document. Very well done on attempting to understand it, Councillor Bentley.
Well, it makes more sense now. I had thought it must refer to something else, so thanks for that.
Hopefully that was helpful.
Yes.
Thank you for the question.
Lovely. Thank you very much for that. So if there are any final questions, if people could put an H in the chat box. Otherwise, I'll move on to the recommendations for this one. Okay, great. So moving on to recommendations. So number one, to with the RIPA inspection and annual update for members. And number two, to recommend the adoption of the changes to the Council's RIPA and social media policies. And obviously, as part of that, officers will look to just update the wording on 2.2 just to clarify that. So again, if we're happy with that, then I'll move on to the next item on the agenda.
Yeah, happy with that.
Perfect, thank you very much. So we're moving on to item number 8, which is the report from the Council's Constitution Working Group in relation to changes recommended to the Council's Constitution. And there are 3 parts to this. So obviously there's the suggestion on licensing, working groups and amendments. I think it might be sort of just useful context for members to know that obviously this has been discussed by the working group, and all 3 of these points, the recommendations that have come through to us, receive consensus from across all parties in that working group. So let me just whiz on to that. There we go. A report on Lorraine as the monitoring officer in this instance.
Thank you, Councillor Ayres. Yes, so there's 3 changes. One is in relation to licensing. This is a minor amendment to an officer delegation in relation to private hire vehicles, and it's about avoiding cases where members have already agreed the principle of approval returning back to members when there is a renewal of the licence and the circumstances haven't changed. The second issue relates to working groups, and this is about adding in a new paragraph for clarification purposes to cover membership and attendance arrangements for working groups. And the final area was amendments to motions. So this arose as a result of the challenges presented by remote council meetings, but the proposed change would apply to all meetings, whether they're in-person and remote meetings in future. The change proposes that there should be 24-hour advance written notice of amendments to motion. There are backup arrangements within the proposed wording to deal with the mechanics for further changes where an amendment which is submitted is invalid. it would be permitted that short amendments, there was some debate at the working group about what a short amendment was, but we took the view we would know what that looked like if we saw it, for short amendments without notice to be made on the night of a meeting, provided they spelt out clearly what was being altered through the proposed amendment. And there's a reference to the relevant paragraph in the Constitution. That's what it's referring to. And that if that did happen, for members' awareness, that would result in a short pause of the meeting if it was a remote meeting, so that the change could be circulated, or the proposed amendment could be circulated, and advice provided to the Mayor on procedure. The reference to 4.1.12.1H relates to updating the list of items that can be changed without notice to include amending an amendment to a motion. I'm happy to take any questions members may have.
Thank you. Do you have any questions on this one? If you could put an H in the chat box. Councillor Bentley, if you'd like to speak.
Thank you, Chair. It's just one quick question. Who is it who actually decides on the membership of a working group then?
To be candid, Councillor Bentley, usually it's something that's agreed through discussion. So generally, what we're saying in here for working groups, generally they would have cross-party representation. We try to do it in a politically balanced way as well. So there are some principles, but there would be discussion around that. So how the seats are allocated for working groups are dealt with in a similar way to committees, but the strict rules don't apply. And that's what we're trying to reflect in this addition in the Constitution. But ultimately, which member from which group is determined by the group. So it's similar to seats on committees.
Yeah, my question really then is, if a group wanted to put 2 members forward into a particular working group, but proportionately they were only entitled to maybe 1 seat, would that second person still be considered as for membership of the working group, or would it be sort of a little bit more rigid than that?
Usually the membership is set for each working group. So often we have working groups of 7, and we have the same with some committees as well, and subcommittees, where 7 works quite well for us with political balance, which is a 4-2-1 split. So 4 Liberal Democrats, 2 Conservative and 1 independent group. That tends to be, I can't say that every single group works like that, but that tends to be the approach. I mean, there could always be a request for additional member. It's going to depend upon the group. It's obviously about trying to get the business done and trying to allocate the seats fairly amongst different members. As I say, the strict rules that apply to committees don't apply to working groups, but we're trying to apply those in the interests of fairness.
Yeah, it's just that I noticed further down on the document it says about that other members of the council may attend but will not be entitled to speak. So I know if you've got a couple of people in our group who are interested in a particular sort of working party or working group for some reason, they may not be able to have their say quite as easily. That was why I brought it up.
Yeah, I mean, obviously what we would expect, because obviously any group could have members who are not on the working group, so there could be a particular item that comes forward. What we would expect is that the representative, the nominated representative on that particular meeting, could represent that councillors' views. That's what we would normally expect. But we do allow working group members. Obviously, working group members would attend. We do allow substitution, but we would expect the member, the main member who usually sits on that group, to brief the substitute appropriately, because it's a bit like a task and finish group. You don't want to have to keep starting again if membership changes. So, I mean, I hope that helps. That's how we envisage it working.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Thank you. I've got a question from Councillor Jones next.
Hello. My apologies, by the way, for joining shortly after the meeting started. I had an operation earlier today at Moorfield, so I'm not quite with it at the moment. But could I just go into the final part, and I'm looking at the amend rule 4112(1)H to read, etc. Could you remind me what the existing item H reads? I think it's something like just to amend. It's just to amend the motion, isn't it?
I think it is, yeah, from memory. I was looking at it earlier today. Hang on, let me just find it. Yeah, 4112(1) says the heading is motions without notice. And then it says the following motions may be moved without notice, and it currently says at H to amend a motion. So what it would say is to amend an amendment to a motion is what it's proposed it should say. I mean, the rule does say that a short amendment to a motion would be allowed on the night, so that would be allowed.
Yeah, it yeah, it was just that I was thinking that it shouldn't that because that effective it's somewhere it says forgive me if I'm because I'm going purely from memory now, and it says that yes, just above it says nothing in the foregoing paragraph would rule out a short amendment to providing it is compliant with 4113(8). It was just at the time it struck me, following on from the working group, that it would be better if that rule said or to it was added or to amend an amendment to a motion. So effectively it would say to amend a motion or to amend an amendment to a motion.
I think if H still said to amend a motion, then that would undermine the change that's being proposed to the Constitution, wouldn't it, Councillor Jones? And that's why it's being updated to say amending an amendment to a motion that doesn't need notice.
Yes.
So it gets very confusing, doesn't it, when we're talking about amendments to motions and amending amendments?
Yes. It was just I was thinking that the mood of the meeting was that we should have where you have small amendments on the night, that would be permitted, and I think it actually says that above, doesn't it?
It does. I mean, I suppose what we could add to H would be a short amendment to a motion, which is referred to in the earlier paragraph.
Yes,
I think that's what you mean.
Yes, it just struck me that it was sort of effectively one was one statement was cutting across the other one, if you see what I mean.
I mean, I don't think that would go against what the Constitutional Working Group was suggesting at all. What you're putting
I think what you've just said just now, I think is probably it probably makes a lot of sense. The wording that you've just said a moment ago.
I mean, if the committee are happy, Councillor Ayres, to put that slight tweak in, then obviously I'm quite happy with that, and I'm quite comfortable that's consistent with what the working group was considering and what they were deciding to do. It's just a bit of further clarification, isn't it, Councillor Jones?
Yes, that's fine.
Great, I think that's really helpful. is everyone in the committee agreed on that sort of slight tweak? If anyone checks, if they could let me know. Otherwise, I think we're happy to make that little change. Are there any further questions at all on this item before we move on? No, I don't see any other H's in the chat box. So perhaps if we move to the recommendation on this one. So the recommendation is to recommend that Council approves the changes to the Constitution set out in this report, and constitutional changes will be considered by the Cabinet prior to any decision by Council. So if we're happy to recommend that. Great. Don't have any objections, so I think then we can move on to the next item. So moving on to agenda item number 9, which is the annual whistleblowing report. Invite Lorraine to speak on that one.
Thank you, Councillor Ayres. This report sets out the background to what is another annual update and covers the period from January to October 2020, during which 5 reports were made. This is a similar level of reporting to that we've seen in the past. Details relating to the 5 reports are set out in paragraph 2.2 of the report. There were 3 valid whistleblowing complaints that were investigated. 1 was fully investigated and there was no evidence of wrongdoing. 2 other cases were investigated as far as we were able to do, and there was no evidence of wrongdoing identified. 1 case was outside of the City Council remit and the other was a service complaint. Obviously, I can't go into too much detail about the individual cases, but obviously if there are any generic questions, I'm happy to take them.
Thanks. If there's any questions, this one, if you put an H in the chat box. So it doesn't look like we've got any questions on this one. So the recommendation here is just to note the contents of the report as regards to the complaints received. So given just a note recommendation, I think we can move on to number 10. Which is complaints to the local government and social care ombudsman, the annual review. Again, I'll invite Lorraine to speak to that one.
Thanks, Councillor Ayres. So again, this is another standard annual report, reveals no change in the number of complaints and none have been upheld against the City Council. No concerns have been expressed by the Ombudsman in relation to the way complaints are handled. So hopefully this will provide members with the reassurance that is needed and the whole purpose of making these reports to members. Obviously happy to take any questions if there are any.
Thanks, Lorraine. Got any questions? Just put an H in the chat box. Okay, don't think we've got any questions on this one. So again, the recommendation is to note the report. So given that, I think we can move on to item number 11. Which is the best practice recommendations from the Committee on Standards in Public Life update report. And I will hand over to Lorraine for that one again.
The Committee on Standards in Public Life report included, this is the one that was published in 2019, included 2 aspects to proposed changes. Those that required legislative changes and those that were recommended that Council should put in place. There were 15 best practice items. These are set out on pages 82 to 84 of the agenda. Items 1 to 3 and 5 are connected with the Model Code of Conduct, which is awaiting publication, but the rest of the best practice recommendations have been fully implemented. Obviously happy to take any questions.
Great. So I've got a question from Councillor Bentley, please.
Thank you, Chair. A question really on a couple of the best practice recommendations. The first one being 3, which I know you said we were waiting for the model code of conduct, but I thought when we discussed this at the previous meeting, our work programme had decided or was set to review this less frequently than annually. And secondly, I think, if my memory serves me correctly, on best practice 4 we did say something about making documents available in libraries as well as hard copies, but that may be referring to something else. I can't remember now. I think it's age.
Thanks, Councillor Bentley. In relation to best practice item 3, I think in reality the council could review the code of conduct every year, but it will probably be a light touch and a more detailed review, depending. I don't think the council could do a detailed review on an annual basis, but certainly I think a light touch review if there's anything that needs to be updated or amended. And I think that's probably what the Committee on Standards of Public Life is trying to get at. So I don't have an issue with that. I think the more detailed review would be every 2 to 3 years. We talked about a cycle of work plan activity for the Governance Committee that would be a 2-year cycle. So I think we were thinking every 2 years. And I think on the alternate years, I would envisage we would do a light touch review just to see if there's anything, is it still fit for purpose? Is there anything in there that we think is obvious needs to be looked at and changed earlier? In relation to best practice item 4, I think that relates to the Constitution. I think the point that you're raising, I think it relates to constitutional changes from earlier this year, and that was linking with the Constitution. Obviously at the moment, libraries are currently open, so that is feasible that we could do that. But again, the model code of conduct is actually part of the Constitution. So I think it was the wider constitutional document we was talking about doing that for. I can check. I don't mind having a look and looking back at it would have been, I think, Governance Committee in March. So I'm trying to rack my brains as well, but I think that's what you're referring to. But I can check.
Thank you. That would be helpful. Thanks.
Great. And I've got a question from Councillor Wright, please.
Yes, Madam Chairman. Sorry, I don't think you'll have the fortunate or misfortune of not being able to see my picture. For some reason, my camera doesn't seem to be working. The monitoring officer and myself have had considerable correspondence on this matter of the question of accepting hospitality beyond business lunches, etc., and gifts made to members of the council, officers and staff members. As you're all aware, I'm against this outdated practice being allowed to continue, and I think it should be prohibited. Now, the national model code is due out, I understand, shortly, and from what I understood at the last meeting, we will get the opportunity to further discuss this particular aspect. Can you just confirm that? As I don't suddenly want to see it accepted without debate. I am aware that the 3 leaders of the council, including the Independents, the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats, have discussed this particular aspect and decided to take no action at the moment until we get this national proposed code. So can you just confirm to me that I will have the opportunity to fully discuss this best practice regarding gifts and hospitality? Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm happy to come back on that, Councillor Wright. So I spoke with Lorraine earlier today about the timings for this. And so what we're going to do is wait for the model code of conduct to come back. And we expect that that will hopefully be in January, and that we can discuss the model code of conduct again in the governance committee at that point. And you'll find that it's on the work plan, which is the final item on today's agenda.
Thank you very much.
Any final questions? Okay, I'm not seeing any more H's in the chat box on this one. So given that, I'll move to the recommendations, which is that the members note the position concerning the council's progress in relation to the best practice recommendations. And that's just to note one. So I suggest we move on to the next item, which is actually the work programme. And again, that's a to note item. I don't know whether Lorraine wants to just run through what we're going to be looking at in the next couple of meetings.
Yeah, this is the final item on the agenda. As has been mentioned, I'm not clear when the model code will be published, but hopefully we'll be able to update you on this and give some hospitality in January. That's what I'm hoping. Obviously, it's a bit beyond my control when it's published, but I'm keeping my fingers crossed on that. And to confirm for Councillor Wright that any code of conduct would need council approval. Obviously reviewed this in October, and we do need to do an annual review. It makes sense to me because we've already done this, the meeting today and the report you've already had really is an annual review of RIPA. It seems to make sense because there's a number of other annual reviews that happen in October to move the RIPA one to October, which means we should perhaps take out the annual review of RIPA in March. But other than that, I'm quite happy that the things are probably coming along at the right time. I mean, obviously there can be movement with work plans, but obviously we'll debate those as issues arise. Happy to take any questions or comments.
Thanks, Lorraine. I think that sounds very sensible to move the RIPA annual review to October. Do we have any other questions at all on the work programme? Bentley.
Yeah, just a quick one on the RIPA review. It did mention about quarterly review. Is that not done in governance? That's done elsewhere, and I'm quite happy to have it moved to October. That's no problem.
I think there's probably reference to the Officer RIPA working group. I think we're proposing to do that twice a year. So that's probably, we're thinking June, July time and then sort of January, February time. But I think that's what the reference is in there. But yeah, certainly from a members' perspective and governance committee, there would only be necessary for there to be an annual review unless there was a particular need to report something to members for oversight purposes.
Okay, thank you.
Lovely, thanks very much. So unless there are any more questions on this, I'll move to the final item on the agenda, which is number 13, urgent business. I'm not aware that we've got any urgent business this evening, so in which case I'll bring the meeting to a close.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye.